I've got a very, very special guest joining us right here on ET now. Dr. Arvind Panagariya, Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog, joins us with his take on one of India's biggest fiscal exercises, that is the union budget. Thanks very much, Dr. Panagariya, for sparing time and speaking to us this evening right here on ET now. I really want to understand from you, because this is the please all budget. It touches most sections of stakeholders in Indian economy. It touches most sections of consumers. Coming on the back of demonetization that it does, do you think it does enough to boost demand and also consumption in turn?
Well, remember, we have to do it within our fiscal constraints. So I think, within the fiscal constraints that the government has set for itself, it goes about as far as one can go. And I think it goes pretty far.
When you talk about the fiscal constraints, as an astute economist that you are you impressed with the fact that the finance ministry is going to adhere to 3% over the next 2 to 3 years, but in the next year immediately, they are going to let there be some amount of fiscal expansion? That 3% target will not be met. It will in fact be 3.2%. Does that leave you impressed, or does it leave you wanting?
Well, you see, given the circumstances, remember that, after the demonetization, there has been some cut in the demand during the last 2 quarters of the current fiscal year. So I think going to 3% would have been probably not very prudent, but at the same time, violating the fiscal path. Meaning, going from 3.5 to 3.67 to the higher deficit would have been very bad signal also. So I think this was a balancing act, and 3.2 seems to be just about right.
Matters when it comes from an economist like yourselves that this is a balancing act, and 3.2 just seems right. But I must ask you a question on capital expenditure. Gone up by 25%. The investments in infrastructure will be to the tune of 3,96,000 crore rupees. All of this put together, because there are concerns that have been raised on gross capital formation that has taken a hit. All of this put together, do you believe has the potential to kickstart investments, because that has been stalled in the private sector? And what more do you believe needs to be done outside of the realm of outlays and budget allocations?
Right. So to your first question, I think, this should be a big help. 25% boost in the capital expenditure is fantastic, very large, almost 4 lakh crore rupees of investment coming from the government. Also, there is a big stimulus on housing, and a lot of the other changes made. Small and medium firms given 5% percentage point tax reprieve. I think these are all measures which also should help the private sector, because remember, whatever government spends on things like infrastructure, housing, etc., brings in the private players also. So I think that is a huge plus, and it should also help the private investment. Now, in terms of what more needs to be done, clearly, I mean, I've been arguing this internally, and I've occasionally said it on my interviews on television also, that we do need to do some cleanup job on the NPAs. I think in terms of big outstanding issues, that is probably the elephant in the room, that the private credit expansion through the banks has been taking a bit of a beating because of the very high NPAs. So that's something that we need to address going forward.
I'm glad you're taking the bull by its horns and talking about that elephant in the room, which is the bad loans that mess up India's biggest lenders. But what about the bank recapitalization amount, just up by 10,000 crore rupees? I'm presuming that public sector banks need a lot more cash, because there's also an asset liability mismatch right now. Of course, that's an unrelated topic. But as far as credit offtake is concerned, they need more funds than just an additional 10,000 crore rupees over last year's budget.
No doubt, if there were more fiscal resources available, I'm sure the government would have actually gone beyond the 10,000 crore it is announced. It is a good step. It is a step in the right direction. But going any further would require more fiscal resources. So, as I said, balancing act. So if you want to stay at 3.2% of the GDP in fiscal deficit, then that is what was available. Having said that, I also still feel that, we need to also bring in complementary steps here to address the problem. Recapitalization alone is probably not going to be sufficient.
Dr. Panagariya, we've spoken about expenditure. We must touch upon revenue, and I'm going to begin with a very ambitious target of divestment put together. There's 72,000 crore rupees. Of course, for the first time, they're talking about listing PSUs. They're talking about listing the ones like IRCTC, IRCON, IRC. My question really is that ambition, is that number a tad too ambitious? 72,000 crore rupees. The government has not met its divestment target for multiple years, and I'm not just talking about this government, even UPA in the past.
This is you're very true, and so I sort of understand your skepticism. But if you look at the current year, 16-17, I think the progress has been a lot more. Again, it's well below the target, original target, the BE for 16-17. But this year's progress is very good, and we still have about 2 months left. So you'll see more of disinvestment happening. Now, I think the coming year, I also expect now actually to real privatization to begin happening as well, meaning that what we call strategic disinvestment. A lot of the pieces of this process are in place now. NITI Aayog had made recommendations on the privatization of 17 enterprises, and these were approved by the cabinet. And the DIPAM, the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, has been actually now putting in place the processes which will lead to actual disinvestment. So I think 72,000 crore is ambitious, but at the same time, I think if we are going to transform the country, one needs to be a little bit ambitious, even if you miss the target by a little bit.
Indeed, I'll have a last question asked of you, and that's on the GST. You've been a long-time votary of that reform. It will perhaps be a reality within 2017 itself. Are you disappointed that threshold rationalization has not happened on other indirect tax rates, even though some part of reprieve coming in for personal taxes on one front?
Well, I mean, not quite sure what you mean, because GST will bring in one tax on nationwide on each commodity. Now you got multiple tax rates for different so the tax rates on different commodities may be different, but the big gain actually of the GST is from having the same tax around the country, and that's what helps unify the market for each product.
So thanks very much for joining us right here on ET Now. That's Arvind Panagariya, Vice Chairman, NITI Aayog, and that NITI Aayog will be recommending a whole host of names for disinvestment and also for strategic sale, and the markets will be keeping a very, very close eye on that one. Thanks very much, Dr. Panagariya, for being with us.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.